On this episode of One-on-One, you remember a while back we had a one-on-one with Coach Don Landry, but so many things have transpired since that interview. Only a few people deserve to come up and get that second one-on-one. He's one of them. He's done so much for the community, done so much for every part or aspect of what he's been involved in. Tonight, Coach Don Landry. One-on-One is brought to you by the Law Office of Waits and Downer. You just had some very unselfish players. Sonny Chaponche comes to mind. He led. I think he still holds a record for assists. And of course, it helps feeding a guy like Larry Wilson.
Well,
but
it does.
He knew how to get it to him.
Well, it does. But Sonny was a big-time scorer in high school.
Yeah.
But he was like a 6'2" center in high school. Well, I wouldn't have recruited a 6'2" center, obviously, but he had been in our camp, and so I knew that he could handle the ball, and so I took him as a freshman. He didn't play as a freshman, but then he started the next 3 years. And I always said he's the best point guard that we ever had. And like you said, he went from a scorer, and he could have scored, but like you said, he was unselfish. He was content. And not only could Larry score, Johnny Hall is the second all-time scorer. He was at the other wing, and Rogers Washington was on that team. And then we had the other guard was different players. But, Sonny was captain. Yeah. And now as captain, he was a great captain. And I'll tell you one humorous story about him. As a captain, he came to me one day and he says, I want to tell you this about one of our players. He said, Joel Ron was our backup center, 6'8" guy from Brother Martin. Because he had quit, wasn't doing good academically, I had campused him where he couldn't leave his room except to go to class or to meals. He said, I need to report. Joel's in the finals of the marathon dance contest. So he said, he not only left the room, he's not studying, so forth.
Yeah.
So I said, well, you go get Joel, and get him in my office as soon as possible. And so when he finally got to me, I read the riot act to him, and I guess he was testing me if that's one excuse. But anyway, Joel was a very important contributor to. Now he's one of the interesting recruits. I don't know that he ever started a game in high school because he was a backup to Rick Roby, who became an All-American at Kentucky. Yeah. And so I think maybe he started one game, and I was fortunate to be there, and he showed me in that one game that he could play. And so normally you don't recruit a player who hadn't started a game. Right. But I saw enough in him. And then another misunderstanding that people have, it's not about the points you score. I went to Port Allen one time, saw a guy score 50 points, but I knew I didn't want him. And then I went to a McKinley game after integration, and their center didn't score a point in their championship game, and yet I tried to recruit him. So, a lot of parents will kind of encourage their sons to try to score as much, thinking that if you score enough, you'll get a scholarship. Well, there's more to it than that.
I remember John Wooden saying also that the reason he could discipline Bill Walton, because he had Swin Nader sitting on the bench. Yeah. It helps have another 7-footer, pretty good center, to come in and take charge. Were you one of those coaches were you driven more by success of winning, or were you driven by fear of failure?
Probably I hated to fail more than how important it was to win. I didn't particularly have a drive like some coaches that you had to win every game, but obviously I wanted to. In fact, I told someone this weekend that the two teams I always wanted to beat worse than anybody was Tech and UL and SLI. And yet we played them real good. We lost in overtime to SLI when Dwight Lamar hit a shot at the buzzer to put them in overtime. And we lost in Ruston to Tech by 1 point when their center, who was not a shooter, made a half-court shot at the buzzer. So we came close, but I always wanted to beat them worse than anybody else.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm.
When did you figure out that I know coaches just don't sit there and go in their office one day and go, I'm a pretty good coach, but you started getting one National Coach of the Year twice. At some point, you got to be sitting down and go, okay, I got this. This is pretty good.
Well, I always, yes and no. I always knew what I was good at and what I was weak at. I was always best at organizing, as I said. I was not the best at in-game adjustments. I realized that. But we were so well prepared. As an example, a lot of these coaches, when you have a late game play, they have this little chalkboard and they draw up a play.
Right.
Well, I never would do that because we practice every situation that could come up. You know, if you had only 1 second left and you had the ball on the opposite end, what we would do in that case. We were well prepared, and I knew that. But now I admit I would probably do it different because I would probably I would still do the teaching like I did, but I would also try to draw it up to reinforce, to make sure we were all on the same page. So
when you moved into the athletic director's job, you were trying to get Nichols' position into conferences, and you were trying to, I guess, recruit yourself and your school into other conferences or start other conferences. How tough was that in your own words?
Well, that was very tough, but what happened, I identified some schools in Texas that were in the same position. There were 2 or 3 schools in Louisiana were in the same position as us. And so at various times, I put together, I have to say I was instrumental in forming several conferences. But, well, the one thing I won, the first one, we got into the Trans-America. And that was, people don't realize that because we were just there for 1 year. But then the Gulf South Conference, which was one of them I helped form, right. I had a friend at Stephen F. Austin. And I said, if you can get the Texas schools to come, I can get Southeastern, Northwestern, McNeese to be in there with us. And so he was able to do it. And so we formed the Gulf Star Conference. And I can remember we met, the organizing meeting we held at Nichols. And we had all the presidents and the ADs. And so I wanted to make sure that it went well. So once again, I'm an organizer. So I had all the presidents. They went to Dr. Galliano's house. He entertained them. All the football coaches went to Sonny Jackson's house. All the basketball coaches, or ADs, I guess at the time, came to our house. You know, I made sure they were entertained. And then at some point, we had a banquet. And so I wanted to have entertainment. So I invited Johnny Hoffman, Uncle Noon, to entertain. And so I was quite worried that the Texas schools would catch on to this Cajun humorous. All of a sudden, I'm looking over there at the athletic director from Southwest Texas. He was laughing his head off. So I knew we were in good shape
You
there.
had him.
So my point is, we showed leadership. We all agreed on the principles of how we did it, and so I'm very proud of that accomplishment. And then later, at some point, I was commissioner of the Southland, and one of the last things I did, we were ready to expand, and the football schools wanted another football team, and the basketball, we didn't all have the same sports. The basketball teams wanted another basketball team. Well, at that time, Texas San Antonio they now have football, but at that time they only had basketball. And so some of them wanted just to take Texas San Antonio. The ones that had football wanted Nichols involved. So I had to work a compromise and convince them, well, let's take both of them, and both satisfied. And so that's what happened. And so that's how Nichols got in. And I'm very proud of that. And
No, you did a great job with a lot of that.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm.
HTV, bringing you local news and sports for over 36 years. From tragic events to heartwarming stories from the community, sports from the regular season and into the playoffs. We were there each time COVID struck. And when Hurricane Ida devastated the area, HTV was there before and after the storm, bringing you live storm track updates and coverage of the aftermath. When other news outlets left, HTV was there, helping those in need. So for your news, stick with the ones you know, the ones that know you.
One of the things I remember about you is when I was going to school, and of course we're doing the Nichols TV, and part of our job was to call the AD or the coaches and set up interviews and go sit down and interview. Now y'all could have said, we really don't have time for this, or we're not going to do it, but you never told us no. You
well,
were
I
accessible.
not only didn't tell y'all no, I had an open door policy. If somebody wanted, whether it was a staff member or whether if it was just a visitor, I would make time to see any of them. I didn't believe, for instance, some coaches, some ADs, if you don't make an appointment with them and ahead of time when they can schedule you, they won't see you. And whether it was salesmen or just visiting people or parents, whoever, my door was always open.
Where'd you get that from? Your mom or your dad? Were they just these friendly people?
Well, I come from a divorced family, and so I was never real close to my dad.
Yeah.
My mother was a very friendly, outgoing person.
She's a go-getter, fun-loving.
Pardon?
She was fun-loving.
Well, and all her sisters and brother. I mean, I had good relationship on my mother's side, but my dad's side also. But that put a grip on my relationship. Now, later, when we started having kids, when we'd go back to Lafayette, when I was here in Thibodaux, we'd go back to Lafayette, and my dad lived on the farm, and I wouldn't go visit him. Well, finally, once again, my wife was the big factor. She said, we're going to go visit him because I want our kids to know their granddad. And so through that, I improved my relationship with my dad. And after that, we became close. But
your wife made some pretty key decisions in your life.
She's a key to my success. I definitely contribute my success to her too.
As I was reading, of course, I talked about your coach of the year, but you also got at Nichols into Division I from Division II. That might not seem big, but it's pretty intimidating for Division II to move into Division I.
Well, we had no choice because once we added football, we didn't have enough Division II schools nearby to play. And so we needed to move. Basically, we moved up because of football. And it's worked out good. And so I have no regrets about that. But, even when we started football from scratch, Bill Clements won a championship fairly early in his career. And then Sonny Jackson won another championship soon after he was there. So we always had, success, and we had some great players. In fact, I was in Natchitoches for the Hall of Fame inductions this past weekend, and I got to visit with Gary Barbaro. Mm-hmm. Gary was one of the first great players in football we ever had. Yeah. And we spent some quality time, my wife and I, with him, and I questioned him about how he ended up at Nichols. And, he was in the band, basically, and had his only senior year. We didn't have a quarterback when we got here, so he started off as a quarterback. Yeah. I said, did you want to be a quarterback, or did you think you could be a quarterback? He said, I knew I wouldn't. And finally, he said, I went into Coach Clements and said, Craig McCullough, I think, was the backup quarterback. I said, he's a better quarterback than I am. Why don't you move me to either wide receiver or defensive back, mm-hmm. which they did, and the rest is history.
I had him on a one-on-one. He's such a class guy.
Well, he's a class, and I compliment him all the time for someone that did as well as he did, and he's had the most success in the pros of any of our players, I guess. And but he's Nichols through and through. I mean, he is at every Nichols event that he can, and I told him how much I appreciate it.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. This one-on-one program has been brought to you by the law offices of Waits and Downer.